Hi! Hey guys, what's up? My name is Dom. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new to my channel, I typically make bookish content, movie content, and anything else in between because I like to do whatever I want on this channel, and tonight is going to be bookish content. For today's video, we are going to go over the 18 books I read in the months of September and October. I'm in a new setup, kind of new. This is my movie reaction setup. Usually I do these videos by the bookshelf, but it is very loud over on that side of the apartment, so I had to stand back here. So hopefully I can get through these book reviews without any interruption because there were children running up and down the halls today. So, 18 books, let's do this. So the first book I read in September is Yellow Star by Jennifer Roy. This is the true story of Jennifer's aunt, who is one of 12 children that survived the Lodz ghetto. This is a pretty good book. It's told in free verse poetry, so it's very digestible, and it's just a unique point of view that I haven't read before, because usually when I read World War II books, it's mostly concentration camp survivors. This is one of the very few I read where the person did not go to a concentration camp, so I got to see their life within the ghetto itself. And it's haunting knowing that she was only one of 12 children who was able to survive this ghetto, knowing thousands lived there at one point. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. Then I read Toothiana, the Queen of the Tooth Fairy Armies by William Joyce. This is book 3 of the Guardian series. That's the series that the movie Rise of the Guardians is based on. So in this series, all these mythical creatures that we know of, such as Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, they come together to fight off the Nightmare King. However, they're not explicitly called Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. It's highly hinted at who they are, but it's William Joyce's own twist on them. I can't get into the nitty-gritty about what this specific book is about because that is spoilers for the first 2. However, this is by far the best one in the series. I gave the other 2 books 3 out of 5 stars because they were running on a formula. This book breaks the formula and ends on a cliffhanger, and I was mad when it ended. I listened to this on audiobook at work, and someone overheard me like exclaiming about this book. It ended and I literally went, what? So yeah, I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. Then we have a book that I have been reading since 2021, which is Mommy Dearest by Christina Crawford. This is the autobiography of Christina Crawford, who was the daughter of actress Joan Crawford. This recounts her life from birth up until Joan Crawford's death, and it was a big deal because this book accuses Joan Crawford of child abuse. I first heard of this book because Kendall over at Kenny JD did a commentary on the movie Mommy Dearest, so I just had to read this book. And the reason it took me 2 years to complete it is because the novelty wore off. I hate to call it a novelty given what it's about, but like the fascination wore off pretty quickly. I read up to a quarter and then it was due back at the library, so I was like, no, I really do want to kind of finish this. Fine, I'll just buy it on the Apple Books app, whatever it's called. And I did, and I would read a chapter here and there, and I was like, ooh, there's other books to read. And it was this year where I was finally like, let's get this off my Goodreads to read list. So I finally finished it just to give it 3 out of 5 stars in the end. My gripes with this book is mostly on the writing style itself and not what Christina Crawford went through. There's a lot of controversy surrounding this book because a lot of people accuse Christina Crawford of faking it and just faking it for money, including her own siblings. I have feelings about that just because there actually were certain parts of the book where I was like, girl, why don't you just get a fucking job yourself? You know what I mean? Like, yes, parents should help their kids, but at some point you need responsibility too. But also, if it came out that an old school Hollywood actress was an abuser, would I be shocked? Absolutely fucking not. Look what's coming out about celebrities nowadays. It's not like this shit is new. This shit has always been happening. If it's proven false, okay, I apologize. But would I be shocked if Joan Crawford herself rose from the dead and explicitly said, I abused my kids? Absolutely not. But back to the writing style itself, which is again why I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I do not think Christina Crawford is that great of a writer. There were certain parts of this book that came off as very corny, and she was trying way too hard to be dramatic and poetic when it's like, girl, just keep it short and sweet. You would pack the punch a lot harder with that. And some things could be a bit repetitive, and some things dragged out, especially her high school years, and she would repeat stories over and over again, and it's like, girlie, you could have summed this up. There was no reason for this book to be as long as it was. Joan Crawford was a terrible person. It makes you wonder where all the other adults were in Christina's life, or why, even the ones who were there, why did you bow down to Joan Crawford? Which is also an interesting case study, the way people kind of worship celebrities back then and how like celebrity worship has changed nowadays, because I feel like nowadays more and more people don't care if you're famous, which is, it's just so interesting. Like, I wonder what would happen if this situation was happening now rather than in the 1950s when Christina Crawford was growing up. I mean, it technically is happening now just with other celebrities, but I mean like quite literally if it's Christina and Joan Crawford would Joan Crawford have all these followers, or would people be calling her out on her shit? Yeah, 3 out of 5, it was really not worth waiting 2 years to finish, but here we are. Then we have Daniel's story by Carol Matas. This is about a boy who grew up in World War II. We see his life from the ghetto up until the concentration camp, up until the end of the war. This book was just okay. I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. I really liked that it was told through photographs, and the story was told in parts. So part 1 was photos of the ghetto, and he would talk about the photos he took, and those were where the stories were from. So that was cool, and I thought that was a nice twist to things. However, this reads like so many other World War II books that I've read in the past. So it was kind of difficult for me to be engaged with it, and it made me realize that I do need to take a break from World War II fiction. Next, we have a chonker that I started in July, and it took me until September to finish, and that is Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell. This is about Scarlett O'Hara, and it's her life from pre-Civil War up until the end of the Reconstruction era. Boy, oh boy, what a story. And I have a lot of thoughts on this. This was a complicated read for me in a sense. Like, the writing itself was fine, but just the morals I was taking in, the messages, and my personal views. I'm going to start off with the messages of this book. I do find the morals and the messages to be morally reprehensible, quite frankly. Margaret Mitchell wrote the story with an agenda. It is very pro-antebellum, very pro-slavery. I would say it's a very sexist book. My feminism was popping out at certain points. Like, I was getting just so mad the way they would handle things, and like, why did Scarlett have to follow these rules? As much as I didn't really like Scarlett either, it's like, why did she have to do this? Why did the woman have to do that? And like, it was making me angry. All that is to say, that's kind of what made this book so morbidly fascinating for me. Because there were certain parts of this book where I was like, oh my god, y'all actually believed that? You know what I mean? So as much as I disagreed with the morals in this book, I still wanted to learn more. I was still so fascinated with these people believed in. Another thing too, Scarlett O'Hara. It's such a famous name. Like, I knew the name Scarlett O'Hara before I knew what Gone with the Wind was, and it actually took me years to realize that those two go hand in hand. She's iconic. And when I was reading this book, I was thinking to myself, do I like Scarlett as a person? Not really. However, I think she's a great character. As a person, she's terrible. She is selfish. She's extremely manipulative. She would throw tantrums when she didn't get her way. So many things I hate about a person were in Scarlett, but I couldn't stop reading. As much as I hated her, she was so captivating. And Rhett Butler is a very charming character as well. He had a few things that I didn't like about him. It's so funny because I feel like at certain points you weren't supposed to root for him because he was anti-Confederacy, but then he was pro-Confederacy, and he just made a lot of choices that I don't agree with, but I still think he was just very charming. And I was so confused on why Scarlett wasn't falling in love with him right away, because I was, and then I found out Clark Gable plays him in the movie. Girl, come on. I do have to give credit where credit is due. There is some amazing prose in this book and amazing descriptions. Whenever Scarlett was scared, I was scared. Whenever Rhett was angry, I was angry. And like, the descriptions of the bodies that's like strewn across the ground that Scarlett had to climb over, that's horrifying, and it puts such a distinct image in my head. But the thing I found the most interesting, and this is a spoiler, but I've never seen a protagonist get so brutally punished in the end the way Scarlett did. I'm not going to say exactly what happened to her because that's too much into spoiler territory, but just bad thing after bad thing was happening to her within those last 100 pages, to the point that even though I didn't like her, I actually kind of felt bad for her at the end, and I wanted to cry a little. I was tearing up. I do have to ask myself, given Mitchell's agenda and the points of the story, is Scarlett's ending a cautionary tale for what happens when you don't abide by Confederate ways? Maybe, but it's still kind of made for, I don't know if I want to use the word great story, for a morbidly fascinating story. Because whether that was Margaret Mitchell's point or not, I still just never seen a character go through this character arc that Scarlett went through. At least a protagonist. Like, villains and anti-heroes, yeah, but not a protagonist who's supposed to be someone as beautiful and like heroic as Scarlett O'Hara. Nothing could have prepared me for that. I've known the famous line, quite frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn, for years, but nothing could have prepared me for what Rhett was saying that in response to. My jaw was on the floor. I do think it's actually, as much as I don't agree with the morals of this book, I do think it's still an interesting deep dive into history, especially during the Civil War and the Reconstruction era, because, I mean, growing up in the Midwest, in the upper Midwest, I was always learning about the Union and, like, what the Union wanted and how we handle things, whereas, like, this is, I think, my first real deep dive, at least in literature and not like my own reading in history, but my first deep dive in literature about how the Confederacy felt. I'm someone who likes to read controversial books, whether the left thinks it's controversial or the right thinks it's controversial, I'm gonna read it. So yeah, I may not agree with everything in this book, but it was still such an interesting point of view to read from, and I have no regrets. And did I take away different things than what Mitchell intended, given my personal views? Yeah, but again, no regrets reading this. I'm glad I had this deep dive. I'm glad I finally got to meet Scarlett O'Hara after knowing that name for years. And I wasn't gonna say this part because it's a major spoiler, but I'm so upset with how her and Rhett turned out. Like, it was obviously intentional and Scarlett got what she had coming, but I felt so bad. I wanted them to be together. I wanted them to be like a power couple and rule the world. And yeah, I think at this point I'm just rambling about this book because there is so much to say. That is just like the surface of my thoughts on Gone with the Wind. But in the end, a questionable 4 out of 5 stars, and now I have to watch the movie one day, which is 4 fucking hours long. The next book I read is Demon Slayer Volume 13 by Koyoharu Gotoge. Demon Slayer takes place in a world where there are demons eating humans, and one day Tanjiro's sister gets turned into a demon, so then he joins the Demon Slayer Corps to try to turn her back into a human. I can't go into what the specific volume's about, given how I would spoil some things, but I will say I gave it 3.25 out of 5 stars. It was a 3-star read until I got to a sad backstory that made me tear up because I'm a sucker for those. But this arc was just really not hitting. This is still within the Swordsmith Village arc, and it's so far my least favorite part of Demon Slayer. Then I was feeling nostalgic and I decided to read a book I haven't seen since I was like in 1st or 2nd grade, and that's In a Dark, Dark Room and Other Scary Stories by Alvin Schwartz. This is a collection of fun short stories that are family friendly, so little kids should not be too scared of them. If you've heard of The Girl with the Green Ribbon, that's where this is from. This took me literally 5 minutes to read because the font is this big and it's mostly pictures. It was a fun, nostalgic field trip, 4 out of 5 stars. Then I read Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. This book takes place in dystopia where the world is falling apart, so everyone finds solace in a video game called The Oasis. The Oasis is essentially a virtual reality, so you can go to school, you can read every book ever, blah blah blah. But then the creator dies and he doesn't have an heir because he doesn't have any children, so he decides to host this contest, and whoever wins the game wins his inheritance, which is like $200 million, and no, $200 billion I think it was, and also becomes the new owner of the Oasis. And it's 80s reference galore because apparently the creator of the Oasis loved the 80s. And you know what? I had a lot of fun with this book. I went in with such low expectations because I heard you either love it or you hate it, and I've noticed a trend, not to bring like sex and gender into it, but I've noticed a trend that men tend to love this book while a lot of women don't. So I begrudgingly went into this, but begrudgingly because, you know, no one forced me to read it, but I'm just too nosy for my own good. And I had a lot of fun. Like, it's a really interesting concept. It has Sword Art Online vibes. I wasn't really a fan of that anime, so I was definitely hoping for better, which I got. I've just been inspired to become smart because I thought the clues were genius. I love the extensive knowledge on the 80s. Even I was learning things. I got really excited when I knew a reference, like War Games. That's a great movie. Love that reference. Love some of the games they mentioned, some of the books and the music. But then the other things I didn't know, I loved learning about them. And just incorporating that in this game these characters had to play, it made for a fun storyline. A fun and educational storyline. And there was one character where I was expecting a plot twist that I absolutely would not have liked, and the author did not take that route at all, which thank goodness, so that's another reason I like this book so much. My only gripe, in a way, is that it could be info dumpy. It was mostly fine for me just because I had no idea what the person was talking about at first when they first introduced something. But if you're as knowledgeable about the 80s as these characters are, I can't imagine what this book would sound like to you, because even the references that I did know about, like for War Games, as much as I like that movie, when he was doing like the entire script in the beginning, it got old and I wanted him to move on. I think he included too much of the script in the story, you know what I mean? So I have a love-hate relationship with the info dumpy exposition. It depends on whether I knew the reference or not, but really that is my only gripe. I gave this book 4.5 out of 5 stars. So a book I started in September but finished in October is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. This is about 4 Native American men in the Blackfoot tribe who are being hunted by elk. This made one of my top books of the year. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. Although it's a horror book, it's not super scary. It's more so eerie than scary. The cold November atmosphere in this book is what gave it that eerie feeling, and the author never faltered once, which is what made this such an interesting read. He tells you exactly what happened in bits and pieces throughout the story. He does not info dump it at you at all. And there's such a tension that you can cut with a knife trying to figure out what it is. I found this a great, simple story of revenge and about breaking the cycle. There's not much more to it than that. Like, sometimes simple works best, and that's why I give this 5 out of 5. Then I read The Telltale Start by Gordon McAlphin, which is the first book in the Misadventures of Edgar and Allan Poe series. This book is about the great-great-great-great-grandnephews of Edgar Allan Poe, and their cat is stolen by a scientist, and they have to go save him. And yet there's a twist on why exactly the scientist wants them. It's a whole thing. It's gonna be borderline spoiler territory if I keep talking about the summary. It's a cute book. It was sold to me as a series with Lemony Snicket and Roald Dahl vibes, and I definitely see that, especially the Lemony Snicket vibes. It is just a very corny book, and I was expecting something. It's not creepy at all. I think that's my main gripe with it. It's not very creepy, and I was expecting creepy given the artwork, and also just given that these are the great-great-great-great-grandnephews of the Edgar Allan Poe, of like the father of horror stories. But the Great Beyond segments were funny, and overall I thought this book was okay, 3 out of 5 stars. Then I read Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. This is about a group of women in a book club who meet this mysterious man, and one of them is very suspicious of him. This is a book I don't have a lot of thoughts on because I just thought it was okay. I didn't dislike the book by any means, but it's one of those books where it's like, yeah, it's okay, can't really tell you why. A lot of people on BookTube are saying this book scared them, and I need them to read more horror books if this is scary, because this was not scary at all. He wrote this book because mostly horror stories about children who are scared and, like, you know, parents don't listen to their kids. So he wanted to write a book in the point of view of the parents to show you that, yes, they are indeed scared as well. They just show it differently. And I saw that. I think he did a good job with that. I had the same nerve-wracking feeling some of these women had. He actually captured my idea of white Southern women very well. Suburban white Southern women specifically. And I don't know why I have such a stereotype of them in my head, but I do, and it's just weird that he captured it so well. But yeah, had some interesting parts. Others actually dragged, especially that middle. The beginning and the ending were my favorite parts, but the middle of the book I was kind of suffering. But yeah, 3 out of 5 stars. Then I read another Stephen Graham Jones book, which is Night of the Mannequins. This is about a boy who pulls a prank with his group of friends, and it's a prank that goes wrong, and he thinks the mannequin he used has come to life and is out to kill his friends. And while The Only Good Indians made my top 5 books, this one made my bottom 5. I don't know what book people on Goodreads were reading, but it must be a different book because I thought this book was terrible. I guessed the plot twist immediately, and knowing the plot twist just made this so unenjoyable. Because the foreshadowing was there, but I think he just made it too obvious, and that's what ruined the plot twist for me. And by knowing the plot twist, it just didn't create an engaging story, and it felt like something I've seen before. Also, it just had a very corny ending, and I'm not about that, so I gave this 1 out of 5 stars. Then I read Demon Slayer Volume 14 by Koyo Gotoge. So far, this is the best part of the Swordsmith Village arc because of all the plot twists and the new things we were learning about characters, so I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Next we have Extasia by Claire Legrand. This is about a girl who has been anointed as Saint Amity in her very religious town, and she learns that things may not be what they seem. It's giving Salem Witch Trials, The Village, The Giver, The Handmaid's Tale, all 4 things in one book. And you know what? This actually started out as one of my top 5 reads of 2023. I think it goes without saying, like a description like that, this book is about cults, and if you know me, I love learning about cults, especially like Christian-based cults. I don't know what it is, but I am obsessed, which is one of the reasons I was so hooked into this book. And like, I even, for a while, I wish this was a book that I had written. I think the author did an amazing job dropping hints here and there that Amity is in a cult, but she doesn't know that. And she did such a great job showing that Amity truly believes what this cult is telling her, while also letting her audience know that that is not a good thing. I figured out pretty quickly what exactly happens to saints during these ceremonies that they talk about, and yet I was still taken aback when it actually happened. There were some gruesome details. She did an amazing job describing like body horror, anything visceral. Given that I mentioned this is kind of like Salem Witch Trials, you could probably guess by now that witches are involved in this, and I thought the coven was really cool. And like I said, this book started out as one of my top reads of the year, but during the last 80%, it's when it became a 3 out of 5 star read for me. There was just something that happened in the last 80%. It's hard to describe what I mean with without spoiling, but I feel like this book was set up for one thing, but then the author decided to take a different turn. What ended up happening, I wouldn't consider a plot twist because it was explicitly mentioned earlier in the book. It's just, I just thought Amity was going to take one path, and then she ended up taking another one entirely, and we don't know for sure what's real and what's not real. It just didn't feel like that's what the author was going for in this book, so it was just very jarring getting to this point. And also, the last chapter just felt incredibly out of place because it is in a different point of view, which I didn't understand because this is Amity's story, and I felt like by changing the point of view at the last second, it took away from that. It would have made a lot more sense if this book switched between point of views, but unfortunately that's not what happened. Although, despite those gripes, I will say I really liked how the authors show trauma in different people and how it manifests itself in different people. Like, all these, like, multiple women went through the same experience, and yet they all had their own way of dealing with that. Their own realistic way of dealing with that. And I do like that Amity was always wanting to help her community, even if her motives were changing throughout the story. So yeah, the last 80% of the book was very disappointing, and I don't really have an unpopular opinion from what I was reading on Goodreads. And it's just so sad because the beginning of the book was the majority of the beginning of the book, the beginning and the middle, I should be saying, was great. I couldn't stop listening to the audiobook. I was disappointed when I got off work and I had to pause it. It could have been my favorite book of the year, and then it just fell off. So it's disappointing, but like, it's not bad by any means. It is a middle of the road book, so 3 out of 5 stars. Then I read A Crooked Mark by Linda Cow. This is about a boy who's part of the group called the Second Sweep, and in the Second Sweep, they don't know each other, so he doesn't know his fellow co-workers and whatnot, but they are assigned people who are believed to be marked by the devil, and they have to observe them. If they're not marked, they get left alone. If they are marked, they get killed. Then our main character, Matt, is assigned a girl that he ends up falling in love with. I thought this was a very interesting idea. Matt actually makes a transition from cult believer to questioning to denier pretty early on in the book, so the rest of the book is mostly just about him, like, trying to outsmart his father and whatnot. And you know, as early as it happened in the book, I still thought it was well done, because this shit, like, I'm not gonna go in too deep into it because I don't want to spoil too much, but like, this shit with the Second Sweep is fucking bonkers. And I do like the twist at the end that the author thought of. Despite all that, I still thought this book was just okay, but in a way I can't really explain why. So I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Then I read a big chunker of a manga called Tomy by Junji Ito. This is about a girl named Tomy who cannot die. If you kill her, not only will she come back to life, but she multiplies. This is his most well-known series, and I kind of went into this with the wrong idea. I thought it was going to be one cohesive plot line. Like, you do need to read the first chapter to kind of understand everything that goes on in this book, but really this is more of an anthology that just uses the same character. But I did find each story very creepy in its own way, and the artwork in here is insane, and this is one of his, like, first stories, so his artwork just does get better with time, and it's so interesting looking at the first chapter and comparing it with the last one. But yeah, I had fun with this. Tomy is a bitch. I had a lot of fun learning about her in all these situations and how she gets stuck in them, and it makes you wonder if you can ever truly get rid of her. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. So then I read The Witch of Blackbird Pond by Elizabeth George Spear. This takes place in the 1600s, and Kit is on her way to the Connecticut territory because her family died, so she goes on to live with her mother's sister. But there is a woman in the territory that everyone is suspicious of. This is a cute read. I didn't realize how young the target audience is for this book, so I went into it thinking it was going to be a bit more mature, but I would argue this is something I should have read back in like 4th or 5th grade, because the writing could be a little corny and melodramatic at times, but whatever, I'm not the target audience, so I can forgive it for that. I do like how her life back in Barbados was compared to her life with the Puritans in Connecticut, just because they're so drastically different. And I guess depending on where you're from, you're going to view points of history differently. Like being American, when I think of the 1600s, I do think of the Puritans and the Salem witch trials, because that's what was happening in my country's history, whereas Barbados, at that point in time, was a totally different lifestyle. So it was nice to see something new brought to the table. This book just wasn't the fall vibes I was expecting. I was expecting more witchiness given the title, but there really wasn't a lot. You would actually be shocked how little focus there is on the witch. But even then, I think I went into this book with the wrong idea, because I expected the witch to be real and not the whole, like, don't judge a book by its cover moral. So that was a little disappointing, but the book as a whole was fine. It had its cute moments, so I did give it 3 out of 5 stars. And the last book I completed in October, because this was all the rage on book Twitter and booktube, and that is You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight by Kaylin Brown. This is about a girl who works at a haunted summer camp of sorts. They're reenacting a scary movie, and her job is to be the final girl, and next thing you know, there is a murderer in her midst, and she has to try to be the final girl in real life. I'm not big into slashers because I do think they're corny, and it's sometimes they're just dumb fun, but it's so hard to get to that point because of how bored I get and corny these stories end up being. But because it was all the rage and I'm a nosy bitch, I had to see what everyone was talking about. And you know, I will say this started off very strong. We had a smart main character for once, and I really liked the narration. It actually reads like how a teenager would talk. However, this book just could not keep my attention. I don't want to blame the author just because I just have such a stick up my ass when it comes to slashers. So this might just be a book I should not have read because it was never for me in the first place. But I feel like slashers also just follow a certain formula that this book ended up following and reminded me of why I don't like slashers. So by the 50% mark, I was pretty done. Which is sad to say because there was a twist, and it goes back to my obsession with cults. And this twist brings something new to the table. So ideally, you would think I would love that. But because of how just fed up and done I was with the story, I didn't care. The twist was announced and I was just like, really? You know what I mean? Like, if it happened in a different book, I think I would have loved it. And when it comes to the ending of the book, I had the same problem that I had with Extasia, where the last chapter was told in a totally different point of view, even though point of view changes did not happen throughout the book. And I think this book would have been stronger without the epilogue. It would have made the ending creepier and more eerie, which granted, given what we did get, that's absolutely not what the author was going for. But I personally think it would have made for a better story. So in the end, I gave this book 2.75 out of 5 stars. And that is it for my September and October reads. You have no idea how hard it was filming this because I kept tripping over my words. But let me know down below if you guys have read any of these books. What books did you guys read in September and October throughout spooky season? If you liked this video, give it a big thumbs up, comment, subscribe. Y'all know the drill. Without further ado, I'm going to peace out and I'll see you guys later. Ciao, tutti.